It was complicated and it was involved and it was a lot of work for folks, but it was not a lot of work for users, right? Which was the objective. And it had the potential to be a lot of work for users and to be really disruptive. And because of the work that the team did here, I think for users it was one of the for the amount of work that happened and the potential upheaval that it could have had versus the upheaval that it actually did have, I think it was like one of the most successful projects we've ever had because it was pretty easy on the back end, and I think John still got like hour or two sleep every night. At least an hour every night. Yeah. So I'll just turn it over to the guys and we can talk a little bit about what we did or what you guys did.
All right. Thanks, Alan. All right. So I'm John Biggerstaff, Ski Katrowski. We're both sysadmins at North Shore. And so like Alan is saying, this is about our migration to O365 from a non-Exchange on-prem server. A lot of people we talk to, a lot of districts are running Exchange or we're running Exchange on-prem, and going from that to O365 seems a bit more straightforward with Migration Wiz and some of the tools that a lot of the consultants out there are using. So anyways, let's go to, our agenda's cut off a little bit there, but anyways, you get the point. So we're going to go over why and what was migrated. We're going to go over our pilot setup, which we initially were told by our consultant, who I won't talk about too much because I don't want to get into that stuff, but that we really couldn't do a pilot. With the being on Zimbra and O365, we couldn't really have a coexistence kind of a situation with people really actively using O365 and people still in Zimbra. But Ski and I got together and figured out kind of how to do that, and we got pretty close to making it work pretty well. Other than, their suggestion was just, people can test it. You can get some accounts up there, people can test it, but you can't really actively use it. Well, we kind of got there. We're going to go over distribution lists and calendar sharing. That was one of the pain points, I guess, I would say, for me during the migration, and we'll get into a little bit of some of the PowerShell scripting that I did for that to make that happen. Microsoft throttling, if you have worked much in the O365 environment with PowerShell and running some heavy commands and what they call destructive commandlets, you've probably run into throttling. I was not fully aware or prepared for how much pain it was going to cause me. So we'll go over some of that and kind of how to deal with it and some tricks to get around it. Post-migration fixes, and that's where Ski's going to come in with our migration was like 99% successful. We'll talk a little bit more about that as far as mail migration, and Ski was able to pretty much make that 100% successful with some tools, so we'll go over that. And some other things that he came across with legacy systems that we have, and applying open source solutions, and then hopefully at the end we'll have some time for questions. All right, so like we've already stated, moving from Zimbra, I don't know if you want to say anything about the Postfix custom code as far as, he was our Zimbra admin.
So Zimbra is just a standard Postfix server with a bunch of custom code on top of it. You can either get a free version or you can pay for a version of it. We're actually paying for it. The other thing is, the reason we moved is it really doesn't make sense to run a mail server these days. There's a thing called reputation that you're going to have a really hard time keeping your mail server reputation high enough so other mail servers will actually accept your mail. You got to worry about spam and phishing. And all the big providers, Google and Office 365 being the primary ones, have a heck of a lot more resources than you do. So running a mail server, I think, has gone the way of the dodo bird. It just doesn't make much sense to do it anymore.
Yeah. Okay, just to give you an idea of what we migrated, stats, so email, calendars, contacts, distribution lists, sharing. We didn't do any file, any data as far as files or getting off our file server. That's not something that was involved here. 4,600 accounts, 60 million messages, 4.4 terabytes of data. So again, like I mentioned earlier, the vendor was 99% effective. It might even have been like 99.2 or 0.4%. It was pretty good, and they told us that up front. And that sounds really great until you look at the amount of messages we had and the amount of messages that don't get moved, and inevitably somebody or multiple people are going to make calls to help desk saying, hey, where's this message, or where are these messages that I was expecting to see here? So, and again, Ski will talk more about a solution he found for that. Multiple copies of messages were not moved, and I think part of that was if people had copied messages into subfolders, then that message was only going to get moved once, because when it would scan down and find the other one, it would say, no, we already moved that one. So that wasn't, I don't know if that was as critical of an issue, but I think it.
We had one principal who BCC'd himself on everything.
Oh, that's right.
So
yeah.
all his sent messages would be, he could file with the message that he actually got from the person, and then he would delete the sent folder. So what happened is when the tool came through, it found all the messages in the sent folder and said, okay, I don't have to worry, in the deleted folder, I don't have to worry about all these things. None of his messages came through. A whole bunch of them didn't. He basically said, where is everything? So this tool really broke on his account.
Yep. All right, so that's stats. I mentioned Migration Wiz before. We did work with a consultant. Initially, I think they were going to use Migration Wiz. It's a BitTitan product. If you've looked at Migrating, you probably have come across that product. It just couldn't do everything that we were wanting. We wanted, like Alan was mentioning earlier, we wanted to make this an easy transition for users, and at the end of the day, not have it be painful for them. So it just couldn't do, mostly in the calendar arena, it just couldn't do what we were looking for. So we found a product called Cloud Migrator, or CloudM, located in the UK. They could migrate mostly everything that we were looking for, or the product could anyways. They say they could migrate calendar sharing, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. It didn't quite go like they had stated it would. Could not migrate delegation, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. Again, 99% success rate. In our particular case, and this is scalable depending on your environment, if you were to use this product, you run one master server, and we just spun these up in VMware. And for us, we had 25 slave servers, and each server could run up to 20, what am I trying to say, 20 threads per server. And so basically it could be migrating 20 accounts at a time. So we scaled it up to 25. We were trying to go for about a 2-day migration period for our primary migration, and that's kind of what we came up with. So again, we spin those all up in VMware. Okay, so our pilot setup. So again, we were kind of told that we couldn't do this, so Ski and I got together, and this is what we did. So I set up SMTP forwarding rules on all of our Outlook accounts. If you guys are familiar with PowerShell at all, that's just a pretty simple for each loop that went through all of the accounts. And so, yeah, I'm trying to remember if we had, yeah, so we had migrated, we had all the accounts up there because we had provisioned all the accounts already. So went through, set up forwarding, SMTP address on all of the Outlook accounts. And Ski, I'll let him talk a little bit more about this. We just called it Zimbra loop stop. But on the Zimbra accounts.
Yeah, so on the Zimbra accounts, we also had a forwarding rule that would say if the message header did not include, or basically forward all mail to Outlook unless the message header included nsd.org, which means that it came from up there. And this is basically a way to make sure I don't get a loop between the account up in O365 and our local account. So it would stop the forwarding from happening.
Yeah.
What all this does is it means that if I was a pilot user, I could get all my email up in O365. I could send email to anybody. It would end up in the Zimbra accounts for the non-pilot users. And the only thing that didn't work was calendaring. They still had to go back to Zimbra from calendaring. We could not figure out any way to do calendaring in both Outlook and Zimbra at the same time. But
Yeah.
mail was totally transparent to the users.
Yep. I didn't mention too, so I was forwarding everything to zimbra.nsc.org. I think that was an alias you put on
Yeah.
our mail domain. So we hadn't changed our MX records, obviously, at this point. Everything is still going to nsc.org. He slapped an alias of Zimbra on there, so that's how I was able to forward everything from Outlook down to Zimbra. So when staff in our pilot group in Outlook would email other staff, it's going to go, of course, to their Outlook account, but then that would get forwarded down to Zimbra, and then his rule would keep that from looping back up again. So like you said, it worked out really well for mail. Couldn't do calendars, so that was still a bit of an issue for users kind of having to deal with both Zimbra and Outlook calendars. But it gave people a good look and gave us a good look as far as what kind of issues we needed to deal with and fix before we got to our primary migration. And I think we did about 2 or 3 different phased approaches to our pilot group, so we kind of kept rolling some people into it. And then as users were migrated up, I would remove the SMTP forwarding off of their own accounts because that wouldn't be necessary anymore. I mentioned turning off junk mail because one oddity we ran into is anything sent from Zimbra to a distribution list. If the members of the list were still in Zimbra, it would go to them fine. It would go up to Outlook as well, but it would end up in people's junk mail. So for pilot users, they were saying, hey, this isn't working, everything's going to my junk mail. Well, I just turned it off temporarily, and then when we actually did our full migration and cut over, I turned it back on for everybody. Again, PowerShell to save the day there. Okay, distribution lists. So this is actually something I had the consultant do for us. So we use a combo of AD sync groups and cloud-only groups. The distribution lists that we manage, that we populate, we have a lot of DLs that we have scripts that populate every night, or maybe even multiple times throughout the day, that then those get synced up to Azure. Those are the ones that we manage. For the ones that our staff manage, we just create those up in the cloud, and it just seems to be the best way rather than trying to figure out how to let them modify the membership and have it right back down to AD. We didn't want to get into that right now. So the consultant wrote a script. Ski was able to export all of our distribution lists out of Zimbra, and then our consultant took that information and was able to write the script to create everything up in Azure, and worked out pretty well. That's just a small snippet of it I threw in there. So calendar sharing. Permissions did migrate over, but we had the expectation that permissions were going to migrate over to O365, and then people log into their Outlook accounts and they see all of their sharing all there in place. Not the case. So when they would go and look at what sharing, what access they had to other accounts, they could see it, but it didn't actually show up in their list of calendars. So kind of a big problem. So what staff were going to have to do initially is actually reshare that share to everyone where it needed to go to, and then that recipient would get the email, that something's been shared with them, and they have to click accept. Again, not something we wanted our users to have to go through, because we're talking thousands and thousands of shares that we had to deal with. So again, Ski exported all the shares out of Zimbra into a CSV, and then I wrote some PowerShell scripts to run the at or set permissions. I'm curious, a show of hands, like PowerShell, do you guys use PowerShell much? Okay, a little bit here and there.
You have to use it if you start playing in O365.
Yeah, once you move to O365, there are just some things you cannot do. Actually, quite a few things you cannot do in the GUI, and then it's necessary. Not only is it helpful, it's very necessary at this point. So I'll show you a little bit of a sample of those scripts. Actually, let me go to that right now. I won't spend too much time on this, but basically, we would have a simple CSV like this. This is an export that Ski did out of Zimbra. Hey. And so basically you have, I don't know if I can write on this or not. Can I do that? Oh yeah. So you have our users over here, the accounts, who the item is shared with, and then the actual calendar name over here. So a lot of times it was just calendar, or you'd have sub-calendars. And so we would, with that CSV, I would then take this and run it against the CSV, and again, trying to make it seamless for the users, or at least as seamless as we could. If you run your, all right, let me look at this here. Where was this here? Now I'm getting confused. Yeah, anyways. So if you run, let me go back to my, yeah, so for anytime you run an ad for a calendar, it's going to shoot off an email to the user saying, hey, here's a share, do you want to accept it? If you run a set, so if the permission doesn't exist, you have to do an ad first. If it does exist, you can just do a set. And basically, I had to set up this script to where if the permission did exist, because some permissions didn't come across, it would skip the ad and go straight to the set, just so they weren't getting duplicate emails all the time. I can't even find it in there now. Anyways, if anybody wants any of these scripts, I'm happy. You just shoot me an email and I'm happy to get this stuff to you, because it started out as like 4 or 5 lines and then grew to quite a large script, because then we needed to do logging to see what accounts were returning errors and a lot of different things in there. So again, I don't want to spend too much time on that, but thought it might be helpful to see some of that. Okay, so anyways, so we get migrated. We do our primary migration on our pilots and all of our tests. I had used those scripts that I just showed you. Everything seemed to be working pretty well. So it seemed like we were going to do about I think we had 2 to 3 days to do our final migration. And the idea was do the migration, then I'm going to start running all these scripts to clean everything up and set up all the calendar sharing. And it seemed like a good plan, except Microsoft and their throttling felt a little bit like that for me at times. So there's a couple different types of throttling with O365. There is the migration service throttling. So this is initially when we were first starting to do our migration. It was, I mean, the throughput was just absolutely horrible. And so we talked with our consultant, and they said, "Oh yeah, it's probably some throttling on the Microsoft side." So, and I'll talk a little bit more about how you can kind of get them to hopefully lift that throttle temporarily. Then there's also the Exchange online throttling, and that covers everything when you're running commands against O365. And I'll go over a little bit more about what types of throttles there are within that. But that's a sample commandlet right there, that if you run that, and if you have a lot of mailboxes, you will hit a throttle that's going to look like this. It's going to say micro delay applied. It's going to have all this information on there. And we'll get a little bit more into what causes that. So, and if you get that first warning, and if you keep hitting it, eventually you're going to get something like this. And if you look down here, I don't know if you can, hopefully you can see that back there. Whoops. I guess that didn't work. Locked is true, and then you have locked remaining. It tells you how long your tenant is actually going to be locked for before it's going to allow you to run more commands against it. And the balance, I underlined balance up there. And what that essentially means, that's milliseconds. And I put this down here for a little bit of math this morning. So 1,800,000 milliseconds divided by 3,600,000 milliseconds per hour equals 0.5. And that, long story short, this basically means you have 30 minutes of processing time that you can use up per hour. So it really comes down to figuring out how much processing time your commandlets are using up against O365. And you can kind of think of it like a bucket, to where Microsoft is filling this bucket up with processing time that you have that you can use up. And as you're running commandlets, you're taking it out of the bottom. And if you're taking it out faster than Microsoft is putting this in, you're going to hit something like this. I have heard, I'm not sure, I can't confirm this, but I've heard that if you continue to keep hitting it, your lockout time will actually double. So kind of their way of saying, hey, we're serious here. You need to stop and slow down. So how to get Microsoft to relax the throttles? Initially, submit a ticket via O365. Be specific, because the first time I did this, we went back and forth and they kept needing all this information from me. So you definitely want to cover what date range you need it increased for, how many accounts you're working with, data, and what type of commandlets you're running, what you're actually doing. They're going to be interested, and that's going to hopefully help to expedite that a little bit. Who do you know at Microsoft? Get your account manager involved. They can get in and actually help get that ticket escalated, hopefully. We're also lucky enough to have one of the parents in our district is one of the leads for the Exchange team. And so he obviously has vested interest in this going well for us. So he had reached out to us prior to this migration just saying, hey, anything you need from me, let me know. And so I reached out to him as well. So we had a lot of pressure on Microsoft to get this throttle lifted for us. And in this case, it was the migration throttle. So we got that lifted for a few weeks, I think. And then the other throttle that we ran into during the migration, when I was running these scripts, kind of had to go through the same song and dance again. Submit the ticket, get a hold of this guy, get a hold of our account manager. And that was much more stressful because we were in our 2 to 3 day migration period, and January 2nd was our go live date, and we absolutely, no questions, had to have it up. Absolutely. So I ended up being up for about 40 straight hours on one of those stretches, and anybody that's in this field, I'm sure, has pulled all-nighters here and there. So it happens, but by the end of that, I was seeing some strange hallucinations in my living room and decided it's probably time to go to bed. But so how to work with it, though? Okay. Even just day-to-day stuff now. So it's not like running scripts against on-prem AD where you're not going to hit those throttles and you can run things all day long. It's a lot different now, and you can't always just get Microsoft to lift it, so you just kind of have to learn to live with it and how to work with it. So just some tips here on that is, don't collect more data than you really need to. Use the filter switch. That basically, using the filter switch is going to put more of the load on the server side, and it's going to help the commandlet to run faster. You can use different admin accounts and multiple sessions, because a lot of the throttling is based on a per session limit. So you can have actually, I think, up to 3 sessions per admin account, and you can actually have up to 3 admin accounts per tenant running against Exchange. So technically you could have 9 different sessions running scripts against O365 against Exchange. During that time when I was hitting those throttles, I started setting up different sessions and breaking up our CSVs and trying to run it concurrently. And again, with very little sleep, it got very confusing, and it worked out okay, but it was not fun. But that's one way to deal with it if you have a lot of scripts you're needing to run against and get a lot done in a shorter period of time. Add start sleep to your loops. So in my script at the bottom, probably didn't see it, but there's a start sleep that you're basically self-throttling yourself, but you are, and you got to play around with that number. I think I came out with 500 for what we were doing. With the next item there, measure command, you can actually put a commandlet inside of that, run your commands, run a for each loop against, say, 20 accounts and see how long it actually takes. and then just extrapolate that and hopefully get a good idea of how long your script is going to take. And based on that, slap a start sleep in there, and again, kind of self-throttling your scripts and adding your own delay in there so you don't hit that limit. Okay, so getting into, this is just a simple little thing I wanted to throw up there. I don't know if you guys have staff that send to misspelled domains often. It's not something you have to do. I just wanted to throw this up there because it's really simple to set up an ETR or a mail flow rule and add in all of these commonly misspelled domains that people in our district send to. And now, when they send to these, and we have a online domain specialist that keeps adding to that all the time, when they send to one of those, they get a nice little message back that says, hey, this doesn't exist. You might want to check the spelling and try it again. So again, simple little thing. I just wanted to throw that in as a nice little trick. Some things that we wanted to fix post-migration. Because of the short timeline we had and some other things I won't go into, is that we just wanted to really keep the scope narrow for what we were doing. We didn't want to open it up to O365 groups at this point, because by default, anybody can just start creating those. These commands, the OWA mailbox policy, if you do a get, if you know PowerShell, you can do a get on that and get a whole list of things that you can modify in there. Really powerful, really simple, as you can see. I mean, these are one-liner things. That's one line, and I turned off O365 creation for all of our users within Outlook. I want to specify that. The preview toggle, this was from a support standpoint. We, I mean, for our help desk, they didn't want to have to take calls in and then try to figure out which version people were using. Again, we just wanted to keep this as simple as possible. So with this line here, that takes that little toggle off that gives people the option to preview the new version that's coming out. Disabling SMTP forwarding. It's just, it was a policy decision that we didn't want users, well, I mean, for good reason, we didn't want people to be setting up forwarding on their own accounts, because it was pretty funny initially, right when we had migrated, we started having people here and there set up forwarding, and they were forwarding off to their external Microsoft accounts and personal account, you know, everything, sometimes within district, but we said, no, that's probably not a great idea to be sending, you know, who knows what kind of student privacy information. So we cut that off. So with that command right there, and I'll show you a little bit in the GUI. How am I doing on time? I don't want to take up too much of yours.
We're about halfway.
Okay, I'm just about done. There's management roles, and again, everything that a user does in Outlook, or really O365, is running PowerShell commands in the background. So with these tricks and with modifying management roles, you can actually block certain PowerShell commands from being run, which then of course blocks them from using it on the GUI side. So I was going to show you this here. So by running these, if you're familiar with the Exchange Admin Center at all, down here, there's this default role assignment policy, and by running those commands, what that actually did is, for our distribution groups, it actually created this here, deny create distribution groups, and then our other one, deny forwarding, are the two items that we wanted to prohibit there. So by running those commands, it actually created those items in the GUI for us. Yeah, so you can see right here where parameters, these are the commands that I was actually, the set mailbox command, and then I wanted to deny the use of those parameters for that command for all users. Locking down distribution groups. That was another thing we wanted to do, is just not let people just create distribution groups on their own. for obvious reasons. So again, using management roles, and again, if anybody wants any of this stuff, I think the slideshows are available. The slides are available, or I can get it to you as well. Last thing I'm going to talk about, and then I'll hand it off to Ski, is just coexistence with O365. And we do use Google for collaboration, and student email accounts are in Google. So I know it's towards the end of ACPE and we're all tired, so I'm going to try to help this. I'm going to try to make some sense out of this, even for myself, because it gets confusing. So our Google domain is apps.nsc.org. That's just the name that we gave it originally when we first created that. That contains staff and student accounts under that domain. In O365, we have two domains set up, our primary mail domain, nsc.org, and we have apps.nsc.org because we also have students in O365 under that domain. So students can log into either side as apps.nsc.org. Staff are going to log into O365 under nsd.org. The problem we ran into is when staff wanted to email students, because we had apps in O365, it would just look at its own tenant and say, oh, there's the student account, but they don't have mail, so I'm going to send a rejection notice back to the sender that says this account doesn't exist. So Ski set up an alias in Google called apps1, and so basically, and then with another ETR, mail flow rule, and a connector, we set it up to where when a staff would email a student account, it would hit their O365 account, but then say, nope, this actually needs to go over to apps1, which is the alias for Google. So where it gets even a little bit more complicated is on the Google side, when people share out documents, because that's where we do a lot of that collaboration, it's going to send an email to the staff apps account in Google. That gets forwarded over to O365 and says, hey, here's a share, do you want to accept this? They reply back to it. That email then needs to go back over to Gmail and then gets forwarded back to O365. So it's this back and forth thing that is probably not optimal, and I think we'd like to get away from that at some point. But for right now, it works. We're looking at, hopefully at some point, changing the staff in Google to log in as nsc.org as well, so it may simplify some of that. So that's kind of what we're having to deal with. And that's just a sample of the ETR that I use for forwarding the mail for staff and student accounts. And that's our outbound connector. Again, really simple. Does the job for us. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Ski, and he's going to take us through what he did to fix some of the issues we had, and open source to the rescue. You want to use that? Yep. There you go.
So like we said, we migrated 99% of our email, which means for some of our more important users, their email didn't get migration. Either they were missing one or two folders, or they were missing lots of their mail. Like one user missed almost everything. So what we did is there's this tool called IMAP Sync. If you're dealing with mail servers, you need to spend $120 or whatever the exchange rate is for this tool. It basically allows you to attach the two different IMAP boxes. They can be on the same server or different servers, it doesn't care. And it syncs them up like our sync. Makes them look the same. So what we did is for all of our senior or important users, or the users that complained a lot, is right after we did the migration, I ran IMAP Sync on their accounts and made sure every email was copied over. Even if it's a duplicate, it got all copied over. Then for the next 3 or 4 weeks, every time a user would say, hey, I'm missing a mail message, or I'm missing a folder, or hey, I thought I had some mail here, it's not here, we would run IMAP Sync. Oh, yep, it's on the old mail server, let's go move it over for you. It really saved our bacon, because the tools provided, migration whiz and stuff, will always do 99%. And then you're going to have users that'll be missing mail, guaranteed. example, I got my host, and then I come down, so Vicky Sherwood was a principal. I have to give them some passwords. It actually has a special setting for Office that deals with the throttling. It will self-throttle, so it won't run into problems with Office. That's how I would move sync up an entire account if I wanted to sync. Oh, this gives an example of it. It also has a dry run. So what we did is we ran it in dry run first to see if anything was missing. Do I have any problems? Then if I found problems, I'd come back and actually run it and fix those problems. So it's really nice. You can run it in dry run and just see what's going on. You don't have to do anything. So in this one you can see 23 folders synced. I would have transferred 363 messages, but I'm not because I'm in dry mode. So I'm missing 363 messages. Most of the messages we found were missing because of the tool we used would only copy over one copy of the message, and people would have multiple copies of it, right? If I wanted to just do one folder, I'd just add in -include the folder I need to copy. So if somebody complained about, I'm missing all my stuff in my discipline folder, what happened to it? Okay, let's go bring it over. We also use this tool for sharing things, like in Office 365. It can be kind of hard to share a folder and an account with somebody else sometimes. I can just copy it from this account, make it appear in the other account. Once John got it moved over, we had a bit of a problem with several things. It broke caldav support. So Office 365 does not support caldav. So if you have caldav clients, they aren't going to work. Our finance, HR Bitech system, per the vendor, will not connect to Office 365, period. So if you're using Bitech and you expect to send mails out to people and you move to Office 365, you're going to have a problem. It won't work. We didn't know this beforehand. If you're using Jamf and you have accounts in Jamf that are just the username, you have to change them to user@nsd.org for it to work with Office 365. I haven't gone through and made that change because I don't know what else that's going to break in Jamf. We have Synergy. Synergy likes to send out, teachers like to send out mail to all of their kids. And Synergy will send out a whole bunch of individual emails. Office 365 did not like that. It had a lot of problems with that. And we had a lot of other systems internally that don't support authentication. Office 365 requires authentication. You don't have any choice in it. So we set up an internal Postfix server that we would say, oh, great, I'll just send it to my internal server, I'll forward all the mail up to the internet, I'm all done. Great. I'll have all my systems use it. I ran into reputation issues. For example, this is the response that I got from Yahoo. Thank you. You have to warm up the IPs. It's like driving an old 1960 Ford car, you know, where you have to set it and warm up the choke a little bit before it will accept your mail. That's exactly what I got. If you put up a mail server today, you send out 10 emails. A couple days later, you send out 100. A couple days later, you send out another couple hundred. And over a period of time, you warm it up, and then other mail servers will say you're a valid mail server. We didn't quite have time to do that. So there's this tool called DavMail. It acts as an Exchange front end. It basically uses the Exchange web services, not the Exchange mail services, but the EWS web services. So you don't have to worry about warming up IPs or anything like that. You're using a web API to talk to Exchange. By Exchange, I mean Office 365. We route all of our mail through it. It's really easy to debug because if there's a problem with Office 365, the mails just get queued up in my Postfix server and I can take a look and see what's going on. I get really good feedback. I get really good support from the authors. I had some problems with Postfix. I posted and the guy that wrote Postfix responded back within hours saying, oh yeah, here's what you need to do to fix it. So easy to debug, easy to work. It runs everything. It was actually designed to be run on your local machine for people who just couldn't stand Exchange or Office 365, and they wanted a standard gateway that used SMTP, used IMAP, LDAP, and caldav. So it acts as a gateway. The server setup, you set up server. I'm going to use EWS. This is your standard URL to connect to Office 365. You pick what port you want things to run on. So you can use standard ports or you can use non-standard ports. It's up to you. And then you point your machine at it. I actually had this running on my laptop for a while because I was playing with it. Then we realized we could use this to handle all the accounts in our system. The one thing about this is it's designed for single user. I'm currently pushing anywhere between 10 to 30,000 mails through it a day. It was never designed for that. The Outlook web interface is designed for individual people sending mails, not machines sending lots of mails. So I'm kind of abusing the Outlook web interface. So far they haven't told me not to. But we do get some errors now and then. The errors are nothing too bad. It just stops, it delays the mail a little bit. The best way to fix that is I add in a 2-second delay. So a teacher may email all 300 other students. It's going to take me a bit to get all that email out because I'm sending 30 a minute. So it's going to take 10 minutes to send it. Right? This setup of Postfix and DAV mail works well because if Postfix can't send it, it just waits. Then it retries in 15 or 20 minutes. And I have no reputation issues because all the mail is actually going through Outlook now. It's going through Office 365. And they're dealing with all the reputation issues. I don't have to worry about that. Some of the other advantages we have. So legacy systems had no problems because it was Postfix, the same as Zimbra. I didn't have to change my names in my Jamf system. That works out fine. Bitech works fine. We created a special alias for systems that don't use authentication, and they all sent from that alias. The other thing we had was our embedded systems, our IoT systems, right? Things like UPSs, HVAC controllers. A lot of those things just don't work with O365. You will never get them to work. HVAC controllers in particular, you can't upgrade them, which means that when I went to our HVAC maintenance guys, I said, you know, O365 won't accept mail from these guys. They said, well, we're in a world of hurt then, because we have to replace them at like 20 grand a piece, and we're not doing that. So working around it, first one is UPS. Does anybody think this is a valid email address? This is the RFC. It basically says that you can have a white space in there. That's optional. So I don't really need a white space right there, according to the RFC. Office 365 says if you don't have a white space right there, it will scramble your mail. You get this weirdest email message back from them. All my UPSs are hard-coded. This is how they send mail. I cannot do a single thing about that. So to get around that is Postfix, regular expressions. I love it. I have a regular expression in Postfix that basically says if you see something that there's no white space, stick a white space in it. So every email from my UPS is all the alerts. They come in with no white space between those two things. And then Postfix says, great, I'm going to put a white space there. And then it forwards it on to Office 365. Office 365 is happy. I'm happy. So think about it. I now have a shim in here that says no matter what weird IoT device or HVAC system or UPS or whatever, no matter how they send mail, I can munge the to and the from fields to make Office 365 happy and then send it on. We had a big problem with SASL. We have a lot of systems that use SSL authentication. Well, that's not even in the RFC anymore because it was dropped several years ago. But these are older systems that have 30-year lifespans. Nobody's going to upgrade them. I was able to use Postfix to enable that type of authentication. No way Office 365 is going to do it, but I can do it at my level and then forward it on as an authenticated mail. That's another one with it. We set it up so the Postfix one only listens to internal networks, and basically it's a sending message only. Nobody can dial into it, can do anything with it. And then the DAV mail basically just grabs the mail from Postfix and shoves it up to Office 365. Another problem we had was all my mail servers. All my servers would mail as some user at the server name. No way does Office 365 understand server name.nsd.org. They don't recognize that as a valid address. So I masquerade things so anything like this turns into user at nsd.org. Office 365 recognizes that. It has no problem with that. So that's another way that I was able to munge the mail because I have the shim in there, this Postfix shim, so that Office 365 will accept it. This is where I set the my rate delay to 2, so I'm not overwhelming it. We can skip that one. I have a generic fallback account. Somebody sends mail that Office 365 doesn't recognize the sender from. I can have it forced back to a generic account. So for example, here's a bunch of mail accounts that send things. This is actually what Office 365 sees over here. Pretty much when that mail comes in the Postfix, I can munge it however I want and then forward it on to O365, and O365 will be happy. And that's been very, very useful for us to be able to do that. Postfix, if you know it, these are the commands. This one was probably the most useful one. The mail was not going through. I had no idea why. I can stop it, take a look at the mail, figure out, okay, why is it not, why is it breaking? Edit it, make changes to it, figure out what changes I had to make to get Office 365 to accept it, and then go ahead and write the Perl regular expressions or whatever I needed to do to get it to pass on. So we use the Postfix Perl regular expressions to add spaces. I set up a separate port to handle the weird authentication stuff that a lot of these systems use that Office 365 will not accept. We set up default mail for systems that don't use any types of authentication. Any questions on using this shim to sit there and solve some of the problems that you might have? Any questions on all the wonderful PowerShell stuff that John did? Is anybody planning to move anytime soon?
I'm already on it. I just wanted to get the bugs and the inside bugs. That way, if issues come up later, then I can use this as a reference to maybe try to work out some of those issues.
So if you have something that just will not talk to O365, this is a really nice way of getting around it.
Yeah, so for me, it's more of a security thing.
Yeah.
That I can maybe, if I do run into those problems now, I have some reference material at least.
Right. This is on the schedule. We uploaded it to the schedule app, so you can download the presentation from up there.
Cool.
What did you move off of?
I don't know. It was before I got there.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, I've only been there a few months, and they recently migrated, but they didn't tell me from what.
Okay.
They just rehauled their servers a couple of years ago, all their servers and everything.
We haven't chosen which platform, either Gmail or Office 365. We have On-Prem Exchange,
Okay.
and we migrated to that group-wise in 2013.
Okay.
A number of the districts, I think we only have 2 districts besides ourselves still on Exchange. manually or use Gaggle, you know, $5 a mailbox and migrate for us. So when I first when we did that, I just went through and set all the parameters for the OUs.
Okay.
You know, so I have individual service counts ready to go whichever way we go. All permission will exchange, but it's mostly the superintendent comes from a school district that was on Gmail. That's Google and, you know, all the business staff and regular staff BSD one.
Okay.
So see how that fight's going to play out. But we have to migrate before the end of the year because we're on 2010.
Okay.
And that's in the light of January.
Yep.
I migrated from an on-premise Exchange server to Office 365 in August. I didn't have the same headaches that you had. I had a whole menagerie of other ones, mostly because my server crashed, and I didn't want to replace it. I was already having a hybrid solution anyway with Office 365, so I made the leap to do it all in the cloud. And so I was under the gun. I had to do it quickly and fastly and efficiently, and so those were mostly my issues. I am here too, just to see if maybe I missed something or you guys that had some helpful hints. But I went from an on-prem Exchange server to, so just different issues.
How long were you down for? Just out of curiosity. If you don't mind me asking.
So it didn't die a sudden death. It died a very slow, painful death over the course of about 4 weeks.
Oh, wow.
And at the end of 4 weeks, I was still able to reboot it 3-4 times a day to make it work. At the end of my migration, I just turned it off and called it good.
Okay.
So, yeah. I talk about losing sleep my whole month of August.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
Brutal.
So one of the things we did do is if you go to the mail.nsd.org site, you actually see a landing page that says click here to go to the new mail server, click here to go to the old one. And it gives our users a blanket saying, sure, I had that mail somewhere. They can actually go look in their old mail server. They can't do anything there. They can't send mail. All they can do is look at stuff there. And if they see something's missing, they can let us know, and we can use the IMAP Sync to copy stuff over. But if you do...
How many people are still needing to do that?
We haven't had anybody call about copying stuff for about a month now. We still have quite a few people who use that as their primary way to access mail.
Really?
Oh yeah, I'm talking 500-600 hits a day.
It's still running.
They haven't figured out they can go directly to outlook.nsd.org, get the mail. They go to mail, click on the link, then go to Outlook.
They're going to the landing page.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you still had them going to
The old mail server?
no.
There are still a few people who do that, but not very many.
Just a page and see if anybody complains.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we will do ultimately, right?
Yeah.
That's what's going to
At some
happen,
point we need
is that option goes away.
Yeah.
So part of that is Christy and I still have hard links on a lot of our workstations that point directly to mail.nsd.org, not the new Outlook. So that's part of it.
Can't you just push out a group policy or something to erase that link?
Yeah, but when your machines don't check into group policy as often as you like, these are older machines.
And most of them are Macs.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
Got it.
Yep.
really help that.
It was amazing how many little idiosyncrasies popped up here that you guys had to find some kind of creative solution for. It's like every morning, come in and
Something
one
new.
problem solved, another little something comes up.
Yep.
The throttling was the one that
That was one that just
unexpected.
ended me. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Google's the same thing.
Oh my gosh.
It's like, you know, I talked to, like, even though we didn't use them for a couple of migrations, the guy at Gaggle was really helpful. You know, this is why I tried doing it, you know, this and go into the Google admin console and change a couple of things. But I had the same thing, you know, messages not migrating. When we did a mail migration when I was at Western Oregon from Sun Java Communications Suite to Gmail back in like 2011, and the migration tools weren't very effective. We ended up using VMware VDI instances to let staff and students migrate them on their own, gave them a step 1, step 2, step 3 Outlook Google migration tool, and you'd have to make 3, 4, 5 passes to get every message. A lot of, you know, we get weird fonts that somebody might have had, and Google would just choke on it. You know, would not migrate that message. So we end up for those, you know, connect to it with Outlook, suck down all their mail out of into a PSD file, then connect to Gmail with the Gmail connector for Outlook, and just copy all the mail back in.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's a really time-consuming way to do it. So using IMAP Sync, we can just create a whole bunch of accounts. I basically pre-created a bunch of IMAP Sync commands with the dry mode. Then once John got the email migrated, I just pressed a button, run this. And then it would say, okay, these are all the accounts that are missing mail messages, and we need to go off and get them.
That's awesome.
It was a lifesaver.
Yeah.
And I still use it today when we've got oddball things saying, oh, this person needs access to all this mail or whatever. And I think I probably use it once or twice a month. And it's just been an absolute lifesaver to move mail around between IMAP accounts.
I've been using Office 365 for Host Exchange personally for 8 years or so. And the same thing, find out, because my wife would complain on her mail account, why do I always have to change my password? You know, so you have to connect to federated services. I just like bookmarked those, and I finally found like marked some strange folder with all the different places to go in and how to manage. You know, it's all PowerShell.
Yep. Management role. Yeah. Very powerful.
So a little side note, does anybody know about plus addressing on mail? No. Oh, cool. So this is a really cool trick. You take your email address, like mine is ckutcherowski@nsd.org. If I go ckutcherowski plus shared or ckutcherowski plus something, this won't work. By the way, this won't work with the enterprise version of Office 365. It works with the consumer version and it works with Google. Okay? So let me give you a different. I typically use this at home. My wife and I have a shared bank account. I sign up for the shared bank account using Kutcherowski plus shared at nsd.org. I then have it then comes, what the mail servers do is they strip off the plus shared and they send it to Kutcherowski at nsd.org, right? Then what happens is I have a rule on my personal email account that says anything that's coming into Kutcherowski plus shared, forward it over to my wife also, forward her a copy. So now, anytime we need to do a bank reset, we both get the email. Anytime we sign up for something that we think is going to be a spammer, you know, you got to sign up to get some sort of service or something and you're not sure about them, I have Kutcherowski plus garbage or junk or whatever, right? Then I can filter all the mail from that and I can see if they actually shared my email address around with a bunch of people I don't care them to be shared with. But plus addressing has been around since the 1960s when email started, and most people don't know about it. But Google supports it, and Office Consumer will support it. And it's just a really nice way if you have to share an email account with multiple people, but you don't want to have to share the password with a bunch of people, right? So if you have like a shared bank account, it's like where I use it a lot. Neat little trick.
Yep. So why did you choose Office 365 over G Suite?
I was wondering if that would come up.
Yeah, I can talk about that. So we knew we were moving off for reasons that Ski described, right? It was just well past the time to move off a hosted environment, or where we were hosting everything. So we knew we were moving off to something else, and we knew that we were going to move to either O365 or Gmail, one or the other. And we also knew that our superintendent, it was an interesting combination. She was comfortable with the Outlook presentation of the email, but could never really get comfortable with the idea of, well, you're looking at this through an Outlook app, so it doesn't really matter what's on the back end, but she had trouble differentiating the back end from the front end on this thing. So when we were talking with her about, well, which way are we going to go, it was almost like the language is what was getting in the way. If we described, well, if we move to Gmail but put the Outlook on the front end, your experience is going to be the same as it is in your previous district where it was all Outlook. The back end really won't make any difference, and she had trouble differentiating. So that was, if I'm being honest, was a key factor.
Yeah. Well, the Outlook connector is, unless it's improved, is utterly awful.
Didn't make any difference. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
It's not a good app, especially on the Mac. It crashes on a regular basis. It's a bad tool. However, that being as it may, that was part of the perception. The other part of the perception is we, objectively, I thought, came back and just looked at the two environments and said, there are good things and bad things about both environments. We've been a Google shop for a long time, since early on it. And like the guys were saying, that's what we were using for our collaboration services, and we were embedded in there. We did have the conversation also of, I don't know if it's in our long-term interest to be so completely down the Google path there. It probably is not a bad idea to retain a little flexibility around here, just so we can be a little bit more nimble. Because I'll say from my perspective, and this is probably certainly biased also, I do not like the direction that Google's going with a lot of the information that they collect, how they house it, how they use it, how they really kind of their stance around privacy issues. I think Microsoft is going in a more positive direction than Google is right now, and I'm trying to anticipate the time where we want to be able to say more easily, we're pulling the plug on Google and we're going to something else because that's just a bridge too far with these guys.
Yeah, I've talked to one of our resellers. We had a big conversation about which way to go because we knew it was coming because the new superintendent was always complaining about, I don't like Outlook. Because she's come from the Gmail district. And then in her experience and some people she's talked about with the firefighters, they save the information, but they are. They've gone away from evil to don't get caught.
Yeah, I think, they've dropped that as a company model, I think, in more ways than one.
And I anticipate at some point in time, because it's a captive audience, so they're training all this younger generation of kids who are getting in their 20s and all they know is Google. I kind of met
Sure.
did early in education. And at some point, hey, it's free now, but all your ducks are in that pond. I'm like, yeah, what do you do?
That's one of the reasons, and that whole culture, I think, is shifting because we're training our young people. But still, the bulk of your business is front office. And so as we train our young people to just be so immersed in Google, when we made the decision, and our students have been in 365 for several years now, when we made the decision, it was because we believed we were training our students well.
And I'd say that we looked at that also, but took a little bit different tact on it, is to say, I think what kids need to be trained more in is flexibility, and our staff also. So forcing our staff, and I don't know if anybody else in the district shares this philosophy with me, but I agree, is that we want to keep ourselves nimble also, and being flexible enough to move back and forth between those environments is a real world skill. And I think it's good for staff and students to be able to do that. I mean, probably most of the people in this room, you work in multiple environments all day long, and it's just an easy thing for you to do. And we can also think of people we know in our lives who they really get entrenched. I can only do this stuff one way. I think forcing people to be more flexible, you're actually doing them a service. I also think that Microsoft is moving to a place where to get access to their services, including the productivity tools, you're going to need to have these O365 accounts. You're going to need to be able to exist in both environments. I think it was just good planning for us to say, you're going to need this account. You're going to need to be able to do this service. Here's a reason for us to start solving this problem now, instead of in a couple of years saying, holy crap, we got to do this all at once.
Yeah. And then just from a sysadmin perspective as well, I don't know, for me, probably not for Ski as much, but I'm more on the Microsoft side of things anyways. So for me personally, moving to this is a lot easier for me to work with. I know PowerShell well. I can manipulate all those things and kind of feel like I have more control over it. The Google side of things, he's always taken care of, and that would have been a little bit more difficult for me to go that direction.
Did you set up any federated services?
No, we're not using ADFS. I'm using AD Connect with password sync. Again, just keeping things simple. I did set up an ADFS server initially, and then was told by a guy at Microsoft that they actually recommended we don't do that unless we really needed it for other services, which we don't right now.
So going over to 65, would you consider like Exchange on AWS?
No, we really didn't look at that. No.
We initially thought about doing that as part of our migration plan off of 2010.
Okay.
So the 2016 AWS and we migrate everybody off the old 2010 system. And decided from there where to go.
Okay.
It's coming up a lot faster.
Yeah. I'm looking at moving other services at some point to either AWS or Azure, but no, we didn't look at that for
Well,
Exchange.
Exchange, message security stuff, we're using a third-party service.
No, we're using Microsoft's right now, and it's working pretty well. We have an online domain specialist that we hired specifically for running some of those things, and so he's really taking that on. He's doing a great job with it. It's doing okay. I wouldn't say it's stellar, but at this point, he's continuing to work with it, and it hasn't been horrible. I'll say that.
Yeah, one of our big things was when we first moved over, good mail kept ending up in junk folders all the time.
Yeah.
And it's taken us a while to analyze it, figure out, okay, we need to change a rule here, we need to do more education here
Yeah.
to get people to understand that you just routinely need to check your junk folder until things kind of get sorted out into Microsoft rules, and whatever logic they have starts figuring out that no, that's not junk.
Yeah, I think it's getting better as we train end users to, like you said, check it, periodically, and then right click, say it's not junk, and it starts to learn after a while. So I think it's getting better, but that was an issue for sure initially.
One thing I wish I had the time to do was to clean up my Active Directory folder. Because I inherited an Active Directory from a tech director, who inherited it from a tech director, seeker, who pulled people into management. I wish I had more time to clean up. Because clean up after the migration is 10 times harder.
Did you just sync everything up for meeting? Yeah.
Well, because I was under pressure.
Well, yeah, that's true.
So yeah, I wish I had I had the time to lay out.
A guy at Microsoft initially told me that I was working with, he suggested just syncing everything up, and we were really hesitant to do that just because it's a new, I didn't. Yeah, so I have specific OUs that I've said these items will sync, but even with that, we have one step further where we use a custom attribute. I forget what we call it, NSD, Azure Sync or something. And it's a Boolean value, so if it's false, that account is not going to get migrated up. If it's true, it'll get sent up there. Now, most of our accounts, 99.9% of them, say true because we want everybody mostly synced up there, but at least it gives us a little bit more control over that. But yeah, I also have it locked down to specific OUs, so I haven't synced everything up.
I synced it just to get it done. So
Yeah.
It's that we have a plan to migrate the Active Directory.
Yeah. Anything else? No?
Well, enjoy the rest
All right.
of the day.
Yeah. Thank you for
Thank
coming.
you for coming.